Clueless, where we take you from clueless to obsessed. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Laura.
I'm Krista.
And I'm Kayla.
We have a really interesting case for you today, and it is solved. So we're not going to leave you wondering. And I do feel like this one is solved better than the one we talked about last week.
Yay.
We'll have a few less questions. I still have some questions, though. I don't know. Maybe it's not possible not to. Are you guys ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go.
It's a sunny afternoon in Waikiki, Hawaii, January 7th, 1972. The gentle hum of waves and the distant laughter of tourists filled the air. 19-year-old Nancy Anderson had just embarked on an exciting new chapter of her life. Moving to this island paradise with dreams as bright as the Hawaiian sun. But what should have been the start of an adventure filled with hope and opportunity would, within hours, turn into a chilling nightmare. How does a woman full of promise move to paradise only to become the center of a mystery that would baffle investigators for more than 50 years? And perhaps more haunting, how does the man responsible go on to live a seemingly normal life, working as a lawyer, blending into society as though nothing ever happened? Nancy's story isn't just about tragedy. It's a haunting reminder of how quickly life can change with the smallest of choices and how some secrets can remain hidden in plain sight. Honolulu in the 1970s was a paradise, a postcard-perfect haven where the sunsets painted the skies in golds and reds, and the Pacific breeze carried the scent of salt and plumeria. But even in paradise, shadows linger. Beneath the warmth of the Hawaiian sun, a storm of violence and tragedy was brewing unnoticed behind the walls of an unassuming Waikiki apartment. For Nancy, it was supposed to be the start of something beautiful. A fresh high school graduate from Bay City, Michigan, Nancy had traded snowy winters for sandy beaches, embarking on an adventure she hoped would shape her future. Bright, kind, and ambitious, she was living her dream in one of the most beautiful places on earth. On the afternoon of January 7th, 1972, Nancy's story came to an abrupt and brutal end, shattering the tropical calm of Waikiki. A murder so vicious, so unexpected, that even seasoned investigators were left reeling. Stabbed nearly 63 times in her own home, Nancy's death would remain a mystery for nearly 5 decades. A haunting reminder that even paradise isn't always safe. This is the story of Nancy Anderson, a young woman whose life was stolen in a place where danger was unthinkable. It's a story of heartbreak, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of justice that would span generations. It's a story that shows somehow, in the end, truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. Who killed Nancy Anderson, and how did investigators finally bring the truth to light?
Okay, now I'm going to Hawaii in March and staying in Waikiki. So,
Oh,
boy.
I know I'm going in September. I'm like, well, at least I'm going to Kauai. So.
Yeah, I just booked our hotel in Waikiki. Oh boy.
This is a fun little reminder
I
for you.
even knew that when I was researching, and I did not think of that. I'm very sorry.
Trying to scare us for our trip?
Yes.
I want you always on high alert, okay?
Yes.
No, not today.
Not today, murderers. Okay, before Nancy became a name whispered in cold case files, she was simply Nancy, a bright, ambitious teenager growing up in Bay City, Michigan. Her life, though tragically short, was full of moments that painted a picture of a young woman eager to embrace everything the world has to offer. Born in 1953, Nancy was the fourth child of 10 children in the Anderson family. Bay City, a quiet community nestled along the Saginaw River, was where she spent her childhood. It was a place of cozy neighborhoods and close-knit families where children played outside until the streetlights came on, and everyone knew their neighbors. Nancy was a standout even in her small town. Friends and family described her as warm and outgoing, with a knack for making people feel at ease. She had a natural charm that drew others to her, whether she was helping a classmate with homework or volunteering at her church's youth group. From a young age, Nancy had an adventurous spirit. While many of her peers were content with the familiar rhythms, of small town life, Nancy dreamed of seeing more. She loved reading travel magazines, imagining herself on distant beaches or bustling city streets. She often told her siblings, quote, "There's so much out there. I want to see it all," end quote. In high school, Nancy's adventurous streak extended to her interests. She took up guitar, teaching herself to play, and filling the Anderson home with music. She also excelled academically, particularly in business studies, and had aspirations of one day running her own company. Those who knew her had no doubt that Nancy's determination would take her far. Nancy's family was at the center of her world. Her parents, George and Jean Anderson, were hardworking and devoted to their children. George, a boilermaker, and Jean, a homemaker, instilled in their kids a strong sense of responsibility and kindness. The Andersons were regulars at their local church, where Nancy was known for her warm smile and willingness to always help with community events. Her siblings remember her as the glue that held the family together. She had this way of making everyone feel special, her younger sister once said. She could brighten the room just by walking in. People gravitated to her. Whether it was helping her brother with a school project or planning a surprise party for their mom, Nancy was always the heart of family life. Life was always fun with Nancy. It was never boring in her world. Nancy's sister later said, "Nancy, like the rest of our family, was raised to be trusting and kind," says Mary. "But that could also lead to being naive because we didn't understand there could be real evil in the world." In 1966, their family faced a terrible tragedy. Nancy's father was working in a chemical company in Midland, Michigan. His position, like I mentioned, was boilermaker, and that day the boiler exploded. Nancy was only 13 at the time. It was really tough for their family.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad.
And there were 10 kids in their family, you said?
Yeah.
I was just thinking about that.
That's a lot, especially for the mom to
Yeah.
then have 10 kids on her own.
And like I said, Nancy was only 13 when that happened, and she was the fourth. So there were
Oof.
A lot of kids.
little kids.
Wow, that's tough.
So devastating. By the time she graduated from high school in June 1970, Nancy was ready for a change. While many of her classmates planned to stay close to home, Nancy was drawn to the idea of starting fresh somewhere new. Hawaii, with its sun-soaked beaches and reputation as a place of endless possibility, captured her imagination. She had to work hard to find her path. Convincing her mother wasn't easy. Jean was hesitant about letting her daughter move so far away, but Nancy's excitement was contagious. She promised to call often, to write letters, and to come home for visits. Finally, her mom agreed, knowing how important this leap was for her. In the summer of 1971, Nancy packed her bags and said goodbye to Bay City. Her family gathered at the airport to see her off, tears mingling with pride as they hugged her one last time. She was so excited, her mother later recalled, she couldn't wait to start this new chapter. She moved in October of that year. Nancy returned home for Christmas that December, and her siblings remember that she brought a gift for everyone in the family. She also created a photo wall behind where they had a pool table in their home, showcasing her parents and all 10 of the children. People Magazine Investigates, which you can find on Max, covered this case recently. A few of her siblings were on that episode. Her older sister, Carol, told this story. She took Nancy to the airport when the holiday was over, and hauntingly, she told her sister, quote, "Carol, I don't want to go back." Carol responded practically by saying, "Nancy, you have to go back. All your things are there." Now, in hindsight, she wishes more than anything she had asked, "Why, Nancy?"
Oh, that's awful.
I can't imagine thinking that and then, I don't know.
Something does happen.
Something does happen. Yep. And you didn't say it.
That conversation just kind of sticks in your mind.
Probably forever.
Yeah.
I mean, that was 50 years after this happened.
Mm-hmm.
She's still. 1 week later, on January 7th, 1972, the family was sitting around the house doing various tasks. It was a Friday evening. There was a loud bang and glass shattering. Carol remembers that her mom was looking the other direction from the photo wall, but instinctively said, "Oh no, Nancy." Nancy's brother Jack and his friend had been playing pool, and his friend had accidentally hit the wall with the photos. Nancy's is the only one that fell, glass shattering everywhere.
That's haunting.
So haunting. It's like, was it at that exact moment in time?
Interesting.
So, January 7th, 1972 began like any other day in the Waikiki apartment Nancy Anderson shared with her roommate. The Hawaiian sun streamed through the windows, casting its warm glow on the simple furnishings. Nancy, ever eager and full of energy, had her usual plans: a mix of errands, settling into her new job, and exploring her life in paradise. But, like the tides that sneak up on unsuspecting beachgoers, the events of that day would take an unexpected, violent turn. Nancy had only been living in Honolulu for a few months. The small apartment she shared with her roommate Jody was modest but comfortable, a short distance from the golden sands of Waikiki Beach. It was a normal day, full of mundane tasks that rarely draw attention until it suddenly does. Around midday, two cutlery salesmen that Nancy had met earlier knocked at the door. They had arranged to meet at 1 and showed up right on time. They later told police that Nancy had been polite and friendly, showing some interest in his pitch before ultimately declining to make a purchase. They were there from around 1 to 3, with her roommate joining them at the end around 2:30. Nancy then went to the Bank of Hawaii, opening an account in person. The teller would later tell police she had returned from break around 2:15, and Nancy was the second person she helped. So she estimated sometime around 3.
Wait, that timeline doesn't make sense. The cutlery people were there from 1 to 3.
Mm-hmm. So it's only 10 minutes from the apartment. So I'm not sure if the cutlery salesman left at like 2:50 or she, actually was helped at the bank at 3:10. It was pretty close to her apartment.
So she went there right after they finished.
So actually, she walked them down. Nancy's apartment was on the second story, and she walked them down to the floor level. They went to some of the other apartments in the complex, and Nancy went straight to the bank.
Okay.
It's sometime around 3, but yeah, good catch. It would take Nancy 10 minutes to walk from the bank back to her apartment after. So now we're thinking 3:15, 3:30, 3:45 maybe she got back. By the time Nancy's roommate woke up from her nap in the late afternoon, the sun was already beginning to set. Walking out of her room into the apartment, she noticed their front door was a little open, which was odd because Nancy should have left for work by then. She always locked it behind her. Then she heard the sound of running water in Nancy's bathroom, and she noticed something was off. Perhaps it was the way the air seemed heavier than usual. It was then, in Nancy's bedroom, that she found her friend's lifeless body. The scene was gruesome. Initially, Jody thought that Nancy had completed suicide. Nancy lay on the floor, surrounded by evidence of her violent struggle, her blood staining the walls and the floor, a stark contrast to the serenity of the world outside those walls. When Nancy's roommate discovered her lifeless body in the bedroom, panic set in. She fled the apartment, screaming for help. Neighbors quickly gathered, their face a mix of confusion and fear. Calls to the Honolulu Police Department flooded in. Within minutes, officers had arrived on the scene. Before they arrived, they thought they were coming to a suicide scene. The first responders arrived at 5:29 p.m. Detectives knew from the moment they stepped inside this was no ordinary crime. Nancy was found fully clothed. Her shirt did appear to have been ripped. The scene showcased the violence and chaos that had unfolded in her apartment that day. Nancy's body lay in a pool of blood, surrounded by signs of her violent struggle. The ferocity of the attack shocked even seasoned investigators. One called it the most violent attack he had ever worked.
Wow, that's so scary. I can't imagine walking into that.
No, especially her roommate wondering maybe if someone's still in her apartment she probably initially thought suicide. I don't know if it would be to not have that fear that someone had been in there doing something like that,
And in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
That's
you were
so
sleeping.
crazy.
Yes. The apartment itself was chaos. Furniture was overturned and blood spatter marked the walls, ceiling, and floor. Yet, strangely, some parts of the apartment remained undisturbed. Nancy's belongings appeared untouched, and there were no signs of forced entry. Nancy's bedroom had 2 twin beds in there. One was made and undisturbed, the other was stained with blood and showed signs of a struggle. The attack appeared frenzied, personal, and horrifying. It wasn't just a murder, it was a crime of unspeakable rage. But why? Nancy was just 19 with no known enemies and no sign of trouble in her life. Violent crime was a rarity in Honolulu, which made Nancy's case all the more unusual. The island city, known for its beautiful beaches and laid-back lifestyle, was rocked by the news of her brutal murder. The sheer number of stab wounds hinted at something deeply personal. Or was it a complete stranger with an unhinged mind? Detectives noted an unsettling trail of evidence through the crime scene. A bloodstained towel was left in the bathroom. Another was found in the entryway, a beach towel, unmistakably stained with blood. And yet another was discovered in the stairwell leading out of her apartment. This pattern suggested the killer may have been wounded during the attack, using the towels in a desperate attempt to stop their own bleeding. It was believed that the weapon used in the murder was a paring knife, which is a relatively small but razor-sharp tool. Its short blade underscored the personal and intimate nature of the violence inflicted on Nancy, leading investigators to suspect that this was no random act. They believed that Nancy likely knew her killer. Forensic investigators methodically combed the apartment for evidence. Every corner, every surface was examined under the harsh glare of portable lights they brought in as the evening descended. Among the key findings were, like we said, no signs of forced entry, suggesting Nancy may have let her attacker in. There was blood in her bathroom and in her bedroom. And when you see a floor plan of her apartment, her bedroom had the bathroom inside of her bedroom. So
it was attached.
it was just hers, and her roommate had her own separate bathroom.
Okay. When you said that the furniture was overturned, was that only in her bedroom or in the living area as well?
There were a couple things in the living area, an end table and a lamp, small things like that.
Okay.
It probably started in the living room, and then she probably tried to get to her room to lock the door or something like that. That's what I would think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too with what they came in and found. And, with the blood being in the bedroom and bathroom, that makes sense that he was chasing her.
Yeah.
The knife that was used was one of Nancy's own kitchen set that was missing, presumed to be the murder weapon. The absence of one of her knives suggested the killer had acted impulsively, using what was available rather than bringing a weapon with them. With the water left running in the towels, detectives got the indication, like we said, the killer had cut themselves during the attack and tried to clean the blood up before fleeing the apartment, probably to not draw suspicion. I don't know how there could be blood all over the bathroom and the bedroom. And she was stabbed 63 times.
Oh,
which
that's horrifying.
I would think whoever did this would have it all over them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Detectives lifted several fingerprints from the apartment, some of which were later identified as belonging to Nancy and Jody. A few, however, remained unidentified, a potential clue that could prove vital in the years to come. Investigators collected samples of blood at the scene, noting that it appeared to belong to both Nancy and the killer. The presence of the killer's blood suggested they might have been injured during the attack, perhaps by Nancy desperately fighting back in an act of self-defense.
So my question here, with this being the 1970s, what does forensic science look like at this point? I mean, are they able to use that blood and make a match? Or, I know it's not as high tech as it is now. So what does that look like?
So they're able to determine basically only blood type. They would have been better served if they had found somebody and been able to match fingerprints to the fingerprints at the scene, but they could determine that there was blood that was A positive at the scene, which was separate from Nancy's blood type.
So, say like with the last case we talked about, they collected a lot of DNA samples. Would they be able to match that to the blood, or are they just looking for people that have A positive and they're a suspect and they have to catch them another way?
Yes, like
Okay.
that. So they would just have to find somebody that was A positive and then bring the other pieces together.
Okay.
I really want to cover a case from like the 1930s and 40s where they didn't have any of that at all,
Yeah.
because it's just fascinating what they have to use to solve those cases compared to what we can do now, right?
Yeah.
Despite the chaos inside, like we said, there's no indicator that someone had broken in. Did Nancy know her killer well enough to let them in? The timing of Nancy's murder added another layer of heartbreak for her family. January 8th, 1972, marked the 6th anniversary of her father's death. That morning, the Anderson family had attended church together to honor his memory. The family's oldest brother, Mike, had the unimaginable task of pulling their mother aside when she returned home to break the heartbreaking news.
Oh, so they found out the next day,
Mm-hmm.
which was the anniversary of her father's death.
Right.
That's awful.
Ugh, that would be so hard.
I was trying to decide if it was because of the time difference or also Nancy and Jody weren't best friends. They were roommates because it was convenient. They both needed a roommate. They didn't know each other that well. So I'm not sure how helpful she was at giving them Nancy's information to track down the family.
Yeah.
And 5 o'clock in Hawaii is so much later in Michigan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe someone looked that up.
5 p.m. in Hawaii is 10 p.m. in Michigan.
Okay.
It says Michigan has multiple time zones, so I guess she was in Bay City.
Yeah.
Mhm. So if they didn't even get there till 5:29, that would have been really late.
Yeah, 10 p.m. So it's about 5 hours.
Gotcha.
And if they didn't have her information, they were just starting. They're probably not going to call her family
Right.
right away. They don't even have that information.
And I mean, they hadn't done the autopsy, so they probably weren't exactly sure what to call and say, even though with that level of brutality, I'm sure they knew right away that it wasn't suicide.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I mean, it's not like she had a cell phone to just pull their number. I mean, she probably had it
Exactly.
written down somewhere in her room.
Yeah, like
But-
her phone, you know.
Yeah, they may not have been looking for that I don't know.
Well, also
Right.
if they didn't get there until 5,
Well, I
Right.
mean, not even 5:30.
yeah, by the time everything's processed, they take her in, get identified. I mean, it could have been
Mm-hmm.
late.
Late. Yeah.
Her mom's response was a blood-curdling scream that echoed the profound grief that would consume the family in the days and years to come. The Anderson family faced additional heartbreak beyond the murder itself. They couldn't afford to travel to Hawaii to actively participate in the investigation. This left them reliant on law enforcement far removed from the case developments.
That would be hard to not be there to be able to ask questions,
Mhm.
just
And
sitting there waiting for answers.
And I'm sure it was expensive even just to call the police department. I remember when I was little, you had to be careful about long distance calls. Like it had to have the same area code
Yeah.
or, I mean, it could be very expensive. For investigators, the case was a nightmare. They had no witnesses, no murder weapon, and no immediate suspects. The lack of leads made solving Nancy's murder an uphill battle, leaving her family and the Honolulu community desperate for answers. Nancy's autopsy revealed 63 separate stab wounds, with the cause of death being one of those stab wounds to her heart. Defensive wounds were found on her legs and hands where she had used her arms and hands to block the knife. There were no signs of sexual assault. There's a podcast called Body Bags, hosted by seasoned detective Joseph Scott Morgan, who is now a professor of applied forensics with a master's degree in forensic sciences. Previously, he was the senior investigator with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office in Atlanta, Georgia. He covered this case in deep dives into the forensic aspects. I highly recommend listening to that episode, and really all of his episodes are excellent. He talks about the process of collecting and evaluating evidence on this case specifically. He talked about collecting the towels and how investigators would have needed to preserve the evidence. In this case, they had to collect and preserve them for 50 years. He also talked about the defensive wounds we just mentioned and how they don't usually see them on legs. It's very common on arms and hands. And he talked about like the webbing between your thumb and first finger. If that's cut, they are looking at defensive wounds. They just can tell from something like that.
So what would they mean defensive wounds on a leg? So like she tried to like kick him?
Yes, they think she must have been on the ground kicking up when he was coming at her. And I'm not sure if that is specifically bruises or the type of cuts that might have come.
Maybe just like scratches more
Yeah.
than like stabs.
Right.
That's horrifying to think about.
It is.
Oh, I'm like picturing it in my head, especially like the webbing you were talking about, like holding your hand up and trying to spread it to cover as much. Oh,
To block
Or like
that.
trying to grab or
Yeah.
things. I don't
Mhm.
know.
Well, and I just think about stabbing someone 63 times. I mean, that motion, like you do it 10 times and you've got force and energy behind it. 63 is just
So many.
so many.
That's not just, a regular. I mean, not that there should ever be a regular
no.
stabbing. That is like a whole other level of aggression.
Right. Right. That's where they'll say often that it's deeply personal because
Yeah.
there's more rage and more emotion behind it.
Well, it
Right.
also seems like something maybe just set him off
Mm-hmm.
because he didn't bring his own weapon. It was something from the kitchen. I don't know. Just awful.
Right. And I mean, if he had been in there before, he might have thought that would be easier than missing one of his own knives and maybe like knew that knife block was there on the counter.
Maybe.
Nancy's roommate Jody described Nancy as, quote, too friendly with strangers and as a person who, quote, would talk to anyone on the street without regard to her personal safety. Like we mentioned when we were talking about Nancy growing up, she was known for being friendly and an easygoing personality. Some might call that naive, but when you grow up in such a small town and you just can't even fathom.
Well, like you said, all of the neighbors know each other. They're all friends. They spend every day hanging out, outside together. I mean, I think that just gives you a different level of trust for strangers than maybe you would have if you grew up in a bigger city.
Absolutely.
I mean, like us, we knew all of our neighbors growing up. Like it
Mhm.
wasn't, there weren't a lot of strangers on our street. So,
Right.
it's a different view than moving to a bigger city.
Absolutely. Jody told investigators on the day of the murder, Friday, January 7th, Jody left the apartment around noon to go shopping. She returned at approximately 2:30 to find Nancy in the apartment with two young men who introduced themselves as knife salesmen. The men left around 3 p.m., with Nancy walking them down to the ground level of their building. Shortly after, Jody decided to take a nap. A lingering question for detectives was why Jody hadn't heard what transpired in the apartment. To test the plausibility, investigators conducted their own experiment. One detective went into Jody's room, while the other stayed in Nancy's. With the water running, a common occurrence in apartment living, they created noise and found that the running water acted as white noise, effectively masking any sounds from the other room. They determined that it was entirely possible for Jody to have been completely unaware of the violence occurring just steps away.
That's so crazy.
Wait, Jody was home during this?
She was sleeping.
She was in her room napping.
I thought you said she came home to this. What?
She came out of her room from her nap and noticed the front door was a little bit
I
open.
don't think I've ever slept that deep in my life. Like,
I
what?
Right. And that's why investigators had to test that because they were thinking the same thing.
Do they think maybe like was Nancy getting ready to take a shower and that's why the water was on? As if she was going to get ready to go to work.
It was the water running like in her sink.
It wasn't like the bathtub.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. The sink water. So, like, he had tried to wash his hands with soap and water.
Okay. I was thinking like the bath water was running or like the shower or something.
Gotcha. Yeah. It was the sink. Like, he'd been trying to wash real quick.
Yeah. Because even like you said, the stuff was turned over in the living room. That's interesting. She didn't even hear that because that would have been before the water got turned on.
That's true, unless he did it as he was leaving. I don't know why you would do that. Maybe you're trying to make it look like a home invasion or something.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, shoot, I need to make this look like something different so they don't know where to look.
It's just interesting, like that the water was on if they thought he was washing his hands. Because that seems like that would have happened after
Yeah, I don't feel like the water would be on for the whole time.
Yeah, because if he was trying to
That's
wash
true.
the blood off of his hands, that would have been after, not masking the sound before.
Yeah, no.
Unless he had gone in there to go to the bathroom and turned it on. If
And
he
left
knew,
it or
yeah,
something.
knew that Jody was in there sleeping, if he'd been talking to Nancy before.
What do you think if he knew? I was wondering something similar. If he knew Jody was in there, why did he, not harm her in any way?
Yeah, that's true too.
I mean, if it's somebody that came in specifically to do that to Nancy and was mad at Nancy, then
Unless the only thing I was thinking, like if he came in and was maybe trying to hit on her, like ask her on a date or something, and she turned him
Mhm.
down and he got upset.
right. I think
mean-
it was something like that.
So maybe he was in there talking to her beforehand and then,
Well,
Right.
if he grabbed the weapon there, like I don't think he came in with the intention
right.
of causing harm.
agree.
Like it had to have been a conversation that they were having, and that set him off.
Mhm.
Yeah, just the whole thing with the water is confusing to me because it seems like that would have been something that happened after the fact.
Yeah.
That's true. Unless I'm trying to think if he surprised her and she was in there washing her hands or something, but they said that she let him in.
Because there was no sign of forced entry.
Mm-hmm.
Unless when she got back from the bank, maybe she didn't lock the door and he just walked in.
Could be
I don't know.
because she was planning to leave not too much later to go to work,
Yeah, you said she was going to work.
right?
So maybe she was in her bathroom getting ready to go to work and he surprised her.
The timeline is so tight. Thinking about Jody waking up at 5:15
Mm-hmm.
or not getting home until, 3:15, 3:30 at the earliest, and that whole attack taking place and him managing to get out before Jody woke up, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's
Do they
really
know how
interesting.
long she had been deceased when they got there?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
All they say is the time range between 3:15 and 5:15 for when she had died.
When she had been, back
Yeah.
in the apartment.
Right, and that's
That's what they
the
have.
only amount of time she was in there. Yeah,
Interesting.
I know.
A lot of questions still on these
A
cases.
lot of questions, and I don't know some of those. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
That's the only thing I can think of is if she got home knowing she was leaving, just walked in, shut the door, didn't lock it,
Mhm.
was in the bathroom getting ready to go to
And
work.
maybe she was. Maybe the shower was on initially.
Maybe she was dressed.
She was.
So maybe she was just in the bathroom getting ready.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Brushing her teeth or something.
Maybe.
The attack did happen in both places.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know.
It makes sense to me that it would have started in the bathroom because she was found in her bedroom by that
Mhm.
other twin bed. So
Yeah.
maybe it's something like that.
Maybe.
That makes the most sense, I think.
Yeah.
So, detectives interviewed Jody's boyfriend, who told investigators that Nancy only talked about men she had dated or spent time with by nicknames. He told police she had mentioned, quote, Reno, Nevada, cowboy, Frenchman, and the dude from Detroit. The man Nancy referred to as Reno, Nevada, was identified as a man we will call Will. According to court documents, Will said he dated Nancy, but had never been to her apartment and didn't even know her phone number. He said he met Nancy and made plans with her through apparently frequent, yet, quote, chance meetings on the beach. It's kind of cute that he was like there waiting for her to show up because he didn't have her phone number and wanted to ask her out. Will also told investigators he had seen Nancy hanging out with other men, but he did not know their names. He described her as, quote, a very nice girl with a great personality, but he said he felt she could be a little less friendly with strangers. But in my mind, it's like, well, that worked out well for you. So
Yeah, I found her on the beach.
it's not other strangers, I guess.
Yeah.
As with any murder investigation, police had to ask difficult questions about Nancy's inner circle. Friends and family back in Michigan were asked about any disputes or relationships that could have followed Nancy to Hawaii. The answers were always the same. Nancy was universally loved, and no one had any reason to harm her. Still, investigators couldn't ignore the possibility that someone close to Nancy had a dark side no one had seen before. It was an uncomfortable and deeply personal line of inquiry that led nowhere. The apartment complex where Nancy lived was home to dozens of residents, and detectives wasted no time canvassing the area for witnesses. Neighbors reported hearing muffled sounds earlier in the afternoon, raised voices, the thud of something heavy hitting the floor, but none of it had seemed unusual at the time.
Wait, so the neighbors hear all this, but the person sleeping in the room next door doesn't?
Well, maybe like the neighbors below her heard more
But like
through the
raised
floor.
voices, like
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to sleep through this, but I do think my husband would. He is a super deep sleeper. And even when I was little, we had like, I don't know, the fire department come to our house or something, and I slept through the whole thing. So,
Oh, really?
yeah.
I don't remember that.
I remember mom telling me that in the morning, and I was like, nope, I didn't hear any of that. I slept through the whole thing. So I think it's possible if you're sleeping.
Well, also, was Jody wearing earplugs?
She
'Cause
might have
was-
been.
I mean, she was napping during the day when her friend was, or her roommate was
Mhm.
home. She knew she was going to be home. Maybe she had earplugs in.
Right? That's true.
could be. I don't know. That seems, especially if neighbors are hearing the raised voices. I mean, sure, the water was on, but I mean, that's not going to mask someone screaming for help. At least not to me. I don't know.
Well,
If she was wearing earplugs, I guess that would make more sense. But
Yeah, I feel like that has to be.
I mean, I wonder if there's a vent in Nancy's bedroom maybe that connects to the apartment below. Or maybe they were hearing another apartment, having an afternoon, whatever. Not that. Just hanging out in the afternoon, or like a toddler.
whatever.
Also, though,
That's true.
like I've had apartments where you can hear every single footstep of the person above you.
Mhm.
But my husband talking in the other room, unless he's yelling, maybe I don't hear him in the closed door room down the
Mhm.
hall, just
Mhm.
because the way the floors are,
Right.
or if they're heavy steppers between floors, especially like you said with vents,
Mhm.
that does make a difference too.
I kind of got the feeling that around, because it was Nancy's bedroom and then the bathroom in between, like her bedroom and Jody's bedroom. And it seems like Jody's bathroom was also up against. And then they said concrete construction.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the walls were just really thick.
But maybe not the floors. I don't
Right.
know.
Right.
But also, if she did have headphones in or white noise on in her room too, there could have
Mhm.
been a lot of things in her room.
To make that nap possible, right?
Yeah, because
This
I
is the
can't nap during the
70s,
day.
though. So what headphones would she have on?
No, I said white noise. Like if she had like a radio on, like some music or something.
Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'd sleep with white noise. I can't imagine not.
yeah, white noise and headphones to try and get your nap. I know I couldn't nap during the day unless
Right.
I had something like, well, I used to have to nap during the day when I worked night shifts,
Right.
and sometimes you need stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. You think about the different stages of sleep too, like the early phase, and then you've got like the really deep REM where it is harder to wake up from when you don't hear as much, right?
That's really interesting.
So none of those noises that neighbors heard, none of it seemed unusual to them at the time. A few also mentioned seeing the cutlery salesman going door to door, which was the first lead that detectives pursued vigorously. One crucial thing was left in the apartment to help detectives track down the salesman. A pipe cutter they accidentally left on the table gave detectives a clear clue about their employer. Investigators were able to track down where they would have worked with this starting point. The men were identified as Parker and Jeffrey. They said they had met Nancy on the street earlier that day in Waikiki and scheduled an appointment to visit her apartment at 1 p.m. They confirmed that Nancy had been friendly but didn't purchase anything ultimately. They focused heavily on these two. I mean, it's wild that it was knife salesmen
That was my thought too.
that were going door to door, and then this happens right after they leave.
Yeah, that's a big coincidence.
Investigators must have thought this was who did it, right?
Yeah.
That was my first thought.
Yeah, they admitted that they were at Nancy's apartment. They had visited with her. They had met her roommate. They told detectives she had walked them downstairs. They insisted they had nothing to do with her death. Their alibi, that they had continued knocking on other doors after leaving her apartment, was confirmed by multiple residents. Still, detectives couldn't shake their suspicions. Both men, however, cooperated fully with the investigation. They both passed polygraph tests and had no indication of deception. Doubts still lingered. Could one of them have used his door-to-door sales pitch as a pretext to scout for victims? However, the fingerprints found in the apartment did not match with the men. They were ultimately ruled out.
That would be so weird to like be at someone's house and then find out 2 hours later they were murdered in such a gruesome scene. That would be so weird for me.
Well, and kind of scary too, because it's very possible they could have found their fingerprints in her apartment
Yeah.
because they were there. They said they were there.
And they were there for 2 hours. They could have
Yeah.
used the bathroom while they were there.
They could
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
I'd be really nervous if I were them.
Yeah, I would be too.
I was happy to see that they took polygraphs, but they also continued checking the alibi, checking the fingerprints, checking blood types, things like that, just to not use just one of those things, because there are cases where people pass polygraph and they did it.
Right.
The accounts from the salesman confirmed what Jody had said with the timeline, placing them at the apartment well before Nancy's estimated time of death, which was determined to be between 3:15 and 5:15. Nancy didn't have a boyfriend that anyone knew of at the time of her death. 1 week after her murder, investigators still had no strong leads. This left her family devastated and grasping for answers. They knew no one in Nancy's circle on the island, which made the situation even more isolating to them. In the aftermath of her death, Nancy was laid to rest next to her father, adding another layer of tragedy as the family dealt with the loss of their daughter while still mourning her father's passing years earlier. A few weeks after Nancy's funeral, her mother received a strange and unexpected phone call. The caller expressed his condolences, identified himself as Mike, and claimed to be Nancy's boyfriend. This revelation was a shock to the family as they hadn't been aware Nancy was seeing anyone seriously, much less seriously enough to call the family and to say that he was her boyfriend. Mike later visited the Anderson family in person. He appeared sincere in his grief and sympathy, spending time with them and sharing memories of Nancy. During his visit, he asked Nancy's sister a chilling question. "Do you know who did this to Nancy?" She replied, "No, do you?" His response was just as unsettling. "No, but it wasn't me."
Oh.
Yeah, seems suspicious.
Investigators questioned Mike early in the investigation. His alibi checked out. He had last seen Nancy at the airport before leaving the island. He wasn't in Hawaii at the time of her murder.
That's really interesting.
Yep. These leads that seem so promising and they check out and then conclusively they do not. Despite the family's initial surprise, Mike's story aligned with the facts and investigators moved on. Detectives continued working tirelessly, following up on every lead and re-interviewing all of the neighbors. One witness recalled seeing a man lingering near the apartment building's entrance around the time of the murder. He was described as clean-cut but nervous, pacing back and forth. Despite this promising lead, no one could provide a name or a clear connection to Nancy.
I find that very strange that, like we talked about earlier, if you stab someone 63 times, I feel like you would have to be covered in the blood. So did he rinse off there?
I mean, he used 3 towels. At least 2 of them were beach towels.
Well,
Yeah.
they found a towel on the
In the
stairs, you
stairs.
said.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly he had run out of there still with blood on him because
Yeah.
that towel had blood on it.
I
Yeah.
wonder where he found those. Did he know where they were? Or were they just out because they go to the beach all the time?
Yeah.
I feel like if you live in a beach town, you just kind of have them
Yeah.
readily available. I don't know. I would.
I would too.
Yeah.
You do for your backyard.
Yeah, that's true. But you would have to know where they were. Like if you just came in my room, you wouldn't see them.
Well, unless she just like kept him under the sink. So he just, while he was trying to wash off, he just looked under the sink and grabbed them. You know,
Yeah.
if they're just right there readily available.
Or maybe
just
they
in the
had
closet.
Yeah, or they had
Mhm.
some by their front door maybe to grab on the way out, things
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And they could have been used too. They could have been waiting to get washed,
Right.
I just feel like it's like 5:15. I'm surprised that they've only seen this one person and no one else saw anybody else.
Yeah. And, they see this one. They were seeing the knife salesman.
Yeah.
Yeah. And nobody reported seeing a man leaving covered in blood.
Yeah.
You would hope that that would be suspicious enough to be like, maybe we should call the police.
Or even just
I would remember
it.
that.
Yeah, you would remember that because
If I'm
that would
coming
be.
home and some guy's running down the stairs covered in blood. There's a good chance I'm calling the police.
Yeah, and you're
Yeah.
going to remember.
Especially if the police show up, later that day asking if you saw anything suspicious.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there was a man running down the stairs bleeding profusely.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So frustrating that nobody saw that.
Mhm.
So the man seen pacing near the entrance was never identified. And while the fingerprints and blood evidence held promise, the technology of the time couldn't provide the answers detectives needed. One manager she had worked with at McDonald's had reportedly become fixated on her, making frequent comments about her beauty and asking her out repeatedly. Nancy, polite but firm, had turned him down every time. Friends said that she had recently told them that his advances made her uncomfortable. Was it possible that his infatuation had turned to rage? Police questioned him extensively, but his alibi, a time card proving he was at work during the murder, checked out. Still, the idea lingered. Had he sent someone else to harm her? Or was his obsession with her purely harmless, if not unsettling? A different one of Nancy's managers described her to the police as dependable and friendly. Apartment complexes can be bustling hubs of activity or places where neighbors exist as strangers to one another. Nancy's building was no different. Police began looking into her immediate neighbors, noting that one in particular had a history of complaints from other tenants. This man, known for his temper and odd behavior, lived alone and kept irregular hours. Neighbors reported hearing occasional loud noises from his apartment, though no one could confirm seeing him with Nancy. When questioned, he seemed evasive, offering vague answers about his whereabouts on the day of the murder. Police pressed him, but without physical evidence linking him to the crime, he remained just another suspicious character in a sea of possibilities. Another theory took investigators beyond Nancy's circle of acquaintances. Witnesses reported seeing an unfamiliar man loitering near the apartment complex around the time of the murder. He was described as disheveled, possibly homeless, and seemed to be watching the building. Could he have been a drifter, someone passing through Honolulu? Police circulated a sketch of the man based on witness descriptions, but no one came forward to identify him. So we have another man with no name or connection to the crime, but these are the only leads that they even have. As detectives pieced together the timeline, they considered a chilling possibility that Nancy's murder had been entirely random. Honolulu, despite its reputation as a tropical paradise, was not a complete stranger to violent crime. It was not common, but they did have instances. Burglaries and assaults had been reported in the Waikiki area, often targeting unsuspecting residents. Could Nancy have been the victim of a predator who entered her apartment on a whim, using her own kitchen knife to commit the crime? The lack of stolen evidence complicated this theory. They didn't find anything else missing from the apartment except the murder weapon. So, like we mentioned, the blood found at this scene was A positive, which unfortunately is the second most common blood type.
Of course.
Right. It didn't give them a lot to go off of. As the news of Nancy's murder spread, the Honolulu Police Department faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The brutality of the crime, coupled with the victim's youth, the setting of Waikiki, captivated both local and national media. Headlines described Nancy as a small town girl in paradise whose life had ended in nightmare. Every lead and tip that came in was thoroughly tracked down, but none led anywhere significant. By June of 1972, so about 5 months after the murder, the case had gone cold. Investigators classified it as a, quote, pending case. The family was told that their best hope for closure was a deathbed confession from the killer. It was far from the reassurance they needed.
No, I can't even imagine.
Like, that's what you just have to wait for that. No.
No, that would be so hard.
Despite the lack of progress, though, Nancy's family never gave up hope. They talked about her often, keeping her memory alive and praying for answers that seemed elusive. At the time of Nancy's murder, the Honolulu police didn't have a dedicated cold case squad. Investigators were forced to prioritize current cases, leaving unresolved ones like Nancy to fall by the wayside. As time passed, the community began to speculate about whether Nancy's murder was the work of a serial killer. Honolulu had seen a string of violent crimes in the years prior, and though there was no direct evidence linking them to Nancy, the pattern seemed unsettling. Residents in the normally beautiful Waikiki neighborhood were gripped by fear, many locking their doors for the first time ever. Rumors spread quickly, each more chilling than the last.
See, that statement there makes me feel like their door was probably unlocked. So if had seen her go in, definitely could have, especially if she lived in a small town, maybe they didn't lock their doors at home either.
Yeah, that's especially, like we said, when she knows she's just leaving again soon. It's the middle of the
Yeah.
day. It's not like it's nighttime.
Exactly. So he definitely could have just walked in.
That's so unsettling.
I don't like that.
I don't like to think that this is just something random because that's just, like I said earlier, just such an act of aggression, that many stab
Yeah.
wounds.
Absolutely.
To think that that's just someone randomly finding someone and doing that, that's horrifying to me.
Absolutely.
But even if it was someone who knew her, who just went to her apartment, they could have just walked in.
Yes, that's true too.
Or, if she knew they were coming over and she just said, yeah, just walk on in.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Maybe she left it open on purpose.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a chilling possibility.
Always lock your doors.
Always. And your windows. My podcast, Morbid, says fresh air is for dead people. I think that's brilliant. Not my podcast, one I love listening to. Nancy's mother had supported Nancy's decision to move to Honolulu after high school graduation. She was nervous, of course. What parent wouldn't be? But Nancy was determined to explore the world beyond Michigan, and she couldn't help but be proud of her adventurous spirit. Back home, the Andersons faced a double-edged sword. Their private grief was now a public story. Local newspapers carried headlines about the bright young woman whose life had been cut short. Friends and neighbors offered condolences, but nothing could ease the ache of their loss. Nancy's 9 siblings struggled to make sense of what had happened. How could someone so full of life be gone? The family clung to one another, finding strength in their shared love for Nancy, but the unanswered questions loomed over them like a dark cloud. As months turned to years, the Anderson family's hope for answers began to wane. Nancy's mother and siblings wrote letters to the Honolulu Police Department, calling for updates and offering any help they could provide. But the responses grew less frequent, and eventually they stopped coming altogether. We had to go on with life, Jean later said in an interview, but there was always this hole, always this ache. Nancy's murder not only left the family grieving, it left them with an unresolved sense of injustice. They couldn't escape the thought that someone out there knew what had happened to Nancy and was living their life as if nothing had changed. Through their pain, the Andersons kept Nancy's memory alive. They described her as kind, loving young woman who adored her family with an unshakable zest for life. Nancy's younger sister remembered the way that Nancy would take her hand and say, "Don't worry, things will always get better." Those words became a mantra for the family, a reminder that even in the face of tragedy, they had to keep moving forward. As Nancy's mother grew older, carrying her grief into their later years, Jean would often say that all she wanted before she died was to know who had taken her daughter from her. "I don't need to know why," she told a family friend. "I just need to know who." That's where we're going to leave part 1 of Nancy Anderson's case. When we come back, we'll jump forward to 2001 and beyond and tell you how this case was finally cracked. Any other last comments before we close?
No, it's just such a long timeline there. The 1970s to 2001. I mean, you said 50 years. Like, that's
Yeah, we're not
They-
solving it in 2001.
No.
Unfortunately.
So awful for her family. All these cases that take just so long. And so her family had to wait so long for any closure.
Right. Horrible.
Yeah, I definitely understand Nancy's mom just saying, like, at this point, I just want to know who it was. Like, I don't need to know anything else. I just want to know that they've been caught and that we know who it is.
Yep.
I can't wait for part 2.
Yes.
Very excited.
All right. Well, please follow us on all the socials, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, all the socials at Crime Clueless. Check out our website, crimeclueless.com, which links to our blog where we have case summaries, updates, and resources used in all of our cases. Thank you so much for listening and spending time with us. And remember, refuse to be clueless, careless, or caught off guard.
Not today, murders.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.